I took a sip of my coffee and nearly choked when I read the letter. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a tax notice. No, it was something far worse. According to the pristine, official-looking document, my 50-acre ranch, the same land my grandfather had broken his back working, the same land I had poured my blood, sweat, and beer money into, was no longer mine. At least, not entirely. The Homeowners Association, a group I had never been a part of, had decided, without my knowledge or consent, that my ranch was now designated as community land for the entire neighborhood. I squinted at the words, reread them, and then did the only logical thing. I laughed, loudly. But the laughter died quickly when I got to the part that read, "Effective immediately, all fences, barriers, or private property signage must be removed in accordance with HOA guidelines." That's when my coffee mug met the floor, shattering into 100 pieces. A creeping, hot rage curled up in my chest. These people were serious. They were trying to steal my land. An hour later, I stood at my front gate as a tan sedan with an obnoxious HOA logo on the side rolled up my driveway like it owned the place. The door opened, and out stepped Karen Aurora, a middle-aged woman with a round frame squeezed into a blazer at least 3 sizes too small. She adjusted her clipboard and strutted toward me with the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable a day in her life. Behind her were 2 other board members, equally smug, equally overdressed, hovering like vultures over fresh roadkill. "Mr. Bryan," Karen said with a voice dripping with fake politeness, "we sent you the notice regarding the community land designation. We'd like to discuss the next steps." I folded my arms and stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "Next steps?" I said finally. "Yeah, I got a next step. It's called trespassing laws." Karen let out a little chuckle, the kind people use when they think you're stupid. "Oh, I think there's a misunderstanding," she replied. "You see, our board voted unanimously to include your land within the HOA's jurisdiction, since your ranch has historically been accessible to community members for hiking and leisure." "Historically," I cut her off. "The only thing this land has historically been used for is ranching, and it's not part of your HOA." Karen gave me a patronizing smile. "It is now." I stared at her, waiting for a punchline. None came. She was actually serious. I glanced at the 2 board members behind her, both nodding along like well-trained parrots. The urge to throw something was rising. Instead, I took a deep breath through my nose and forced my voice to stay level. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You people, who don't own a single blade of grass on this property, held a little vote and decided my private land belongs to you?" Karen tilted her head, as if explaining something to a particularly slow child. "Not to us, Mr. Bryan, to the community." I was still trying to process this insanity when a silver SUV came rolling up my driveway. The doors popped open, and out spilled a family of 4, 2 parents, 2 kids, and a golden retriever. They made their way toward my pasture like it was a Sunday outing at a public park. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," I shouted, marching toward them. "What do you think you're doing?" The dad, a balding man in a golf shirt, smiled at me like I was the one trespassing. "Oh," he said, "Karen said the HOA opened up this land for public use. Figured we'd check it out." Karen, who had followed me down, placed a firm hand on my shoulder like we were old friends. "Bryan, this is exactly what we were talking about. Community members enjoying their space." I shrugged her hand off and turned back to the family. "This isn't your space, this is my land." The wife looked confused. "But the HOA said—" "I don't give a damn what the HOA said," I growled. "Get off my property." The husband frowned. "No need to be rude, buddy." I was about 3 seconds from filling his golf shoes with manure when another car pulled in, then another. People were arriving with picnic baskets, blankets, and coolers like I'd invited them for a 4th of July cookout. I turned to Karen, patience officially gone. "Get these people off my land, now." Her eyes widened in faux innocence. "Oh, Bryan, there's no need for hostility. This transition will go smoother if we all work together." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Karen, I swear on my granddaddy's grave, if you don't get off my property, I will personally escort you down this driveway with a garden hose." That got a reaction. Her smug expression faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Well, she sniffed, adjusting her blazer. Then we'll have to escalate this matter. She spun on her heel and stomped back to her car, her two minions scrambling behind her. The trespassers, sensing something was wrong, began quietly gathering their things and heading back to their vehicles. As Karen opened her door, she threw one last threat over her shoulder. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I grinned, slow and low. "You'll be hearing from my shotgun." As soon as they were gone, I picked up my phone and dialed William. William wasn't just any lawyer. He was the kind of guy who made a career out of demolishing overreaching HOAs. He picked up on the first ring. "William," I said, "I've got a situation." 20 minutes later, I was in his office, laying everything out. William listened intently, occasionally scribbling down notes, nodding with that familiar glint in his eye. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "The classic HOA land grab," he muttered. "They have no legal grounds, but they're banking on you rolling over." I frowned. "So how do I stop them?" He smirked. "You don't just stop them. You fight dirty." I leaned forward. "I'm listening." "First thing," he said, tapping his fingers on his desk, "make it impossible for them to use the land. You need deterrence. Fences, signs, cameras, security systems, the works." "I already have fences," I muttered. "Not that they care." "Then electrify them," William said with a wicked grin. "And make sure it's perfectly legal." I sat back in my chair considering it. It was crazy. It was bold. It was exactly what I needed. The very next morning, I drove to the county records office and dug through every file, every dusty folder I could get my hands on. As I suspected, my land was never part of the HOA's jurisdiction, never signed over, never listed as community accessible. But that didn't stop Karen Aurora from trying to rewrite reality. She had filed paperwork claiming an annexation of my ranch into the HOA, citing some obscure community development clause. Absolute garbage, but just official-looking enough to cause problems if I didn't act fast. That same afternoon, I marched into the HOA's tiny office, tucked behind the community clubhouse. Karen was there, sitting smugly behind her desk, flipping through a stack of paperwork. She barely looked up when I entered. "Brian," she said in that syrupy tone that made my skin crawl, "here to discuss compliance with the new regulations?" I slapped a thick folder onto her desk. "Nope," I said. "I'm here to give you a bill." Karen raised an eyebrow and opened the folder. Inside were official documents confirming my land was never part of the HOA. Until they tried to annex it, and since they insisted it belonged to the HOA now, that meant they owed me, specifically, 20 years of unpaid HOA dues for the land they supposedly managed. The number, just over $200,000, 0 cents. Karen's face went ghost white. This is absurd." "What's absurd," I said, leaning forward, "is thinking you could steal my land and not pay a cent for it. So here's the deal. Either the HOA pays what it owes, or we take this to court, and a judge is going to have a field day with your fraudulent land grab." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "The board will never agree to this." "Then you better start convincing them," I said. "Oh, and one more thing. Until this is settled, I'll be making some adjustments to my property." And with that, I turned and walked out, already dialing my fencing contractor. "You a bill." Karen Aurora arched an eyebrow and opened the folder. Inside were the official documents confirming that my land had never been under HOA jurisdiction until they decided to annex it. And since they claimed my property was now part of the association, that meant they owed me. Specifically, they owed me 20 years' worth of unpaid HOA dues for the land they had supposedly managed. The number I wrote down was just over $200,000. 0 cents. Karen's face turned a shade of pale I hadn't thought possible. This is absurd." "No," I said coolly. "What's absurd is you thinking you could steal my land." I leaned in, keeping my tone steady. "So here's the deal. Either the HOA pays me everything they owe, or we take this fight to court, where a judge is going to have a field day with your fraudulent land grab." Karen's lips tightened. "The board will never agree to this." "Then I suggest you find a way to make them," I said. "Oh, and one more thing. Until this is settled, I'll be making a few modifications to my property." I turned and walked out before she could argue. By the time the sun set, I had ordered enough fencing material to make Alcatraz look like a playground. The next morning I got to work. The first thing I did was reinforce my fences with industrial-grade wiring. Then I installed a state-of-the-art security system, motion sensors, floodlights, cameras, the whole 9 yards. But the best part? The electric fencing. Nothing lethal, of course, just enough voltage to send a very firm message to any would-be trespassers. By noon, word had spread that I wasn't backing down. Curious neighbors gathered at the edges of my property, whispering among themselves. Some looked concerned, others looked amused. Karen, however, was furious. She stormed up to my gate, flanked by 2 HOA board members and a clipboard clutched in her fist. "This is a clear violation of HOA regulations," she seethed. "Funny," I said, leaning casually against the fence. "I don't remember agreeing to any HOA regulations." She huffed, flipping through her paperwork. "Electric fences are dangerous." "So is trespassing," I shot back, "but since you and your little club are so determined to claim my land, I figured I'd make it more community-friendly." Karen's eyes darted to the massive LED sign I'd installed near the entrance of my ranch. In bright, flashing letters it read, "Warning, trespassers will be zapped." "You're out of control," she snapped, her voice shaking with frustration. "No," I said with a grin, "I'm just warming up." That weekend, the HOA decided to test my patience in the most ridiculous way possible. They organized a massive community picnic on my land. I wasn't even surprised when I saw dozens of people setting up folding chairs, blankets, and grills right in the middle of my pasture. Kids ran around with kites. Dogs chased frisbees. Someone even had the nerve to set up a volleyball net. It was as if my land had officially become a public park overnight. I watched from my porch, sipping on a cold beer, waiting for the inevitable. Sure enough, it didn't take long. One overly eager jogger, headphones in, completely oblivious to the world, ran straight into the electric fence. There was a loud crackle, a yelp, and then a very ungraceful stumble backward. A few feet away, a group of kids playing soccer kicked their ball right into the fence. One of them tried to retrieve it and got a nice little zap that sent him yelping back to his parents. Screams. Confusion, chaos, it was glorious. Karen was the first to recover. She stormed through the crowd, red-faced and livid. "This is illegal!" she shrieked. "No, it's not," I called back. "I checked. Perfectly within county regulations. Non-lethal, too. Wouldn't want anyone getting seriously hurt. Just a friendly reminder to stay off private property." "You're a menace," she spat. "No," I corrected her. "I'm a landowner." "Something you seem to have trouble understanding." Her face twisted into something truly ugly. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming off. The next day I received an official cease and desist letter from the HOA demanding that I take down the electric fences and remove all deterrents. I forwarded the letter to William, who practically cackled when he read it. "They really think they can bully you into giving up," he said. "Oh, this is getting fun." He drafted a counter-demand stating that if the HOA continued to claim my land as community property, then they were financially responsible for its upkeep. That meant paying for fencing, security, liability insurance, and, of course, back taxes. By the time the numbers were crunched, the HOA owed me so much money they'd have to start charging every homeowner triple just to cover the costs. Karen's response came in the form of a desperate emergency meeting with the HOA board. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Word spread fast. Homeowners were furious when they found out their fees were about to skyrocket, all because Karen had overstepped her authority. People who had once sung her praises were now calling for her resignation. 2 days later, I found Karen at my gate again, looking far less confident than before. She cleared her throat, gripping her clipboard like a lifeline. "Mr. Monroe," she started, her voice strained. "The board has reconsidered its stance. We're willing to discuss a peaceful resolution." I grinned. "I'm listening." She swallowed hard. "If you agree to remove the fences, we'll drop all HOA claims on your land." I took a long, dramatic sip of my coffee. Tempting. But here's the thing, Karen. I like my fences. And I really like watching you squirm. Her face tightened. "This is extortion." "No," I said. "This is justice. You tried to steal my land, you lost, and now you're going to do exactly what I say." Karen stared at me for a long moment, jaw clenched, before finally nodding. Fine. The board will vote to officially remove your land from the HOA. That's a good start, I said. And one more thing. You're going to cover my legal fees. Her nostrils flared. You can't be serious. I crossed my arms. Oh, I'm dead serious. Silence stretched between us. Then, with visible effort, she gave a stiff nod. Fine. I smiled, watching as she turned on her heel and walked away. The war wasn't over yet, but I had won the battle, and I wasn't done making them pay. Karen's defeat should have been the end of it, but I knew better. People like her don't just roll over and accept failure. They plot, they scheme, they look for any possible loophole to claw their way back to power. So, I stayed ready. I reinforced my fences, added even more security cameras, made sure William was on standby for whatever nonsense they tried next. But to my surprise, things stayed quiet. Then, about a week later, I started noticing strange things. A group of men in suits, none of whom I recognized, were seen walking around the neighborhood, speaking in hushed voices with various HOA board members. A few residents stopped waving at me in town, looking guilty whenever I caught their eye. It didn't take long for word to spread. The HOA was in full-blown crisis mode. Homeowners were furious about the special assessment fees Karen had tried to impose, and a petition had started circulating, demanding her resignation. It all came to a head at the next HOA meeting. Now, I normally wouldn't have bothered attending one of their little neighborhood cult gatherings, but this time was different. This time they were discussing whether or not Karen should remain in charge, and I wouldn't miss that for the world. I normally wouldn't have bothered attending one of their little neighborhood cult gatherings, but this time was different. This time they were discussing whether or not Karen Aurora should remain in charge, and I wouldn't miss that for the world. I arrived early, taking a seat near the back, arms crossed, as I watched the chaos unfold. The moment Karen walked in, the tension in the room thickened. She took her usual seat at the front, but for the first time there was no smugness in her expression, no air of superiority, just tightly controlled panic. An elderly man, Mr. James, stood up first. He'd lived in the neighborhood for decades and had once been one of Karen's biggest supporters, but tonight he looked furious. "We've had enough," he announced, his voice shaking with anger. "Karen, under your leadership, this HOA has gone from a simple community association to some kind of dictatorship. You overstepped your bounds, cost us thousands of dollars, and nearly got us sued into the ground." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen opened her mouth to defend herself, but another homeowner cut her off. "You told us Brian's land was legally ours," a woman snapped. "You lied, and because of you, my family has to pay an extra $5,000 in HOA fees this year. Are you going to reimburse me, Karen?" Karen's face went red. "I was acting in the best interests of the community." "No," I called out from the back, leaning forward with a grin. "You were acting in the best interests of yourself." Heads turned toward me. I stood up slowly, letting the silence stretch before I spoke again. "Karen tried to steal my land," I said, loud and clear. "She thought she could bully me into handing it over. And when that didn't work, she tried to bury me in paperwork. But she failed. And now she's scrambling to clean up the mess she made." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't even belong to this HOA, Brian." "Oh, but I do," I replied with a smirk. "Remember, you forced my property into your jurisdiction, which means I get a vote." A ripple of shock spread through the room. The board members whispered among themselves, realizing the full scope of what I had just said. Karen had been so determined to claim my land that she had unknowingly given me the power to vote on her removal. Someone motioned for the vote to begin. It wasn't even close. One by one, hands shot up in favor of removing Karen from the HOA presidency. The final count was overwhelmingly against her. Karen slumped in her seat, looking as if someone had just pulled the rug out from under her entire existence. The next day I was back on my ranch, enjoying the peace and quiet, when a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. I stepped onto my porch and watched with mild amusement as she stomped back and forth, barking orders at the movers. She had lost everything, her power, her influence, her standing in the neighborhood, and now she was leaving. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That evening I got a knock on my door. A group of HOA board members stood there looking unusually nervous. One of them, a younger guy named Robert, cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, we've been talking," he said, "and since Karen's gone, we need a new president." I narrowed my eyes. "Let me stop you right there. If you're about to ask what I think you're about to ask, the answer is hell no." Robert raised his hands. "Hear us out. We know the HOA has been a disaster lately. We need someone strong, someone who won't let power go to their head." I crossed my arms. "Not interested." Another board member, a woman in her 50s, stepped forward. "Brian, if you become president, you could dissolve the HOA." That made me pause. "Say that again?" "If you take over, you could vote to dismantle it entirely," she said. "No more fees, no more ridiculous rules, just homeowners managing their own property like it should have been from the start." I took a long moment to think it over. The idea of running an HOA made me want to gag, but the idea of permanently putting an end to their nonsense? That had potential. I exhaled sharply. "Fine, I'll do it, but only on one condition." Robert nodded eagerly. "Anything. I don't want to hear a single complaint when I burn every one of your HOA rule books." A week later, it was official. The HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote. Homeowners were free to do whatever they pleased with their own property. No more fines for grass that was an inch too tall. No more restrictions on paint colors. No more tyrannical power trips. And just like that, peace returned to the neighborhood. To celebrate, I threw the biggest barbecue the neighborhood had ever seen. The smell of smoked brisket filled the air, beer flowed freely, and for the first time in years people actually looked happy to be living here. As I stood by the grill, watching my neighbors laughing and enjoying themselves, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Satisfaction. William showed up halfway through the party, shaking his head in amusement. "You really did it," he said, grabbing a plate of ribs. "You destroyed an HOA." I smirked. "Told you I'd fight dirty." He laughed. "What are you going to do with all your free time now?" I glanced toward the horizon, where my newly reinforced fences stood tall and unchallenged. "Oh, I'll think of something." And with that, I raised my beer, taking a long, slow sip as the sun dipped below the horizon. My land was mine again. No one would ever take it from me, not an HOA, not a bureaucrat, not a single soul. I had won. Ever feel like someone tried to steal what's rightfully yours just because they voted on it? That's exactly what happened when Brian opened a letter claiming his 50-acre ranch, the same land his family worked for generations, had suddenly become community land. No warning, no agreement, just HOA arrogance at its finest. But instead of backing down, Brian fought back. With legal firepower, electrified fences, and one hell of a backbone, from trespassing families to shady board meetings, he exposed the lengths HOAs will go to claim control. And in the end, he didn't just win, he dismantled the HOA from the inside out. Here's the lesson. Know your rights. Document everything, and never let anyone bully you off your land, no matter how official their clipboard looks. If you've ever dealt with HOA madness, or just love watching entitled people get a taste of their own medicine, this is your kind of story. Smash that follow and hit subscribe to HOA Revenge for more real-life drama, bold takedowns, and backyard justice you'll wish you saw sooner. New tales every week. Don't miss the next blow-up.